Good morning, ladies. It's 10:30, and for those of you who haven't met me already, my name is Julie Davis, and I run a business called Julie Davis Flower Workshops, and I teach classes at my local education centres and privately one-to-ones, and also I pop up in fabulous locations. I was over at Doddington Place Gardens last week as part of the Chelsea Fringe events, and I'm going to be at Anna's Country Flowers down here in Kent, outside Canterbury, next month, so you can always catch me live if you want to as well. And I also host Flower Start, which are the 4-week online flower arranging classes as well. So I'm just going to kill for time for the moment, just to see whether anybody is going to join me live this morning. And as I do that, I just noticed I've got a dead head on my carnation, so I'm going to get rid of that. So I thought I would talk about the often maligned Spray Carnation, and I don't know whether you like them or not, but they're the really long-lasting flower that you get. You find bunches and bunches of them in your supermarket or your local florist, and I thought it would be interesting to have a look at how to arrange those in perhaps a more stylish way than just putting in the vase. I mean, quite often that is just what I do. I've got a vase here and I'd fill it with water and I'd cut the ends of my stems, and I pretty much go like that. And I just think that we could be a bit more creative than that and have a flower arrangement that just looked a bit more designerish, really, and perhaps something that you would grace your home, and you'd be really proud that you'd arranged it. So what I'm going to do now is, the way I've set my camera up, you can't actually see what I'm doing. So I'm going to lean across and just adjust the angle of my camera. Now you know it's me speaking to you, and come down and see whether you can see what I'm doing. So fortunately, I've got a top on that's covering my modesty, and you can see the tabletop I'm working on. So these are my flowers here, and what I'm going to do is, just as we would do normally, I've had them cut in water, so overnight I'd recut the stems and taken off the bottom leaves, and they've been standing in a bucket of water overnight. And the first job I do is just to go through stem by stem, just having a look to make sure everything is looking fit and healthy. And while I was waiting for you, I was cutting off some little substandard bits and pieces, pinching those off, because I don't want to have those in my vase, and sometimes you don't notice them to begin with. So you just need to make sure that the flowers you are going to use are in tip-top condition. Like, for instance, these ones here, I think they look a bit old. Can you see this is starting to go brown on the edges? I've inherited these flowers, so I'm just making use of those again. So I'm going to discard those ones, just run through, and this one has snapped in the process, so I might put that to one side if I need some shorter stems later, but it's not going to work quite so well for this project that I've got in mind. So everything's looking good there. So I talked about when we arrange flowers, and we normally would just pop them straight into a vase. You'd take off all the bits of green that were going to be in the water, and probably you may well arrange your flowers like that and just have the full height of the stems in the vase. But I thought we would be a little more creative today. So what I'm going to do is take a smaller jar here. Now, this is actually a peanut butter jar. And when I was as I run my online classes, one of the modules we do is looking at vases from around the home. So not all vases have to look like a vase. They can be all sorts of things. And one of the ladies on the course, Becky Pink, who runs a really lovely blog, she says that she used peanut butter jars, and I thought that's actually quite a good idea. So it's bigger than a jam jar, but just, you know, a manageable size. And what I've done is soak the label off, but you can see here that it's still got all the gungy sticky on the back here. And what you can do is use a bit of white spirit and a cloth and just work that off. But I'm going to cover that up, so you're not going to see that. So the idea today is, rather than put my flowers inside the vase, I'm going to put them on the outside of the vase. So shock horror, that but it's just to do something different, to try and take the everyday flower of the Spray Carnation and just do something a little bit more different with it that'll be eye-catching, and then you have friends and family around and they'll be amazed that you've managed to use this very much sort of ordinary workhorse flower and create something with it that's a bit out of the ordinary. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my flowers to length, because I want them to be just a little bit higher than the jam jar. And once I've cut one, I can use that as the template for everything else. So I've got them here. So my jam jar must be about, I don't know, 10 or 12 centimetres high. I've cut my flowers to about 15 centimetres high. And I'm going to just lay them out on the side and cut them to approximately the same length. I'm not getting a ruler out or anything like that, but I'm just approximately going through. Here, I think you can see that, I've got a side bud here, and the flower head must have fallen off. So I've got this truncated end just here. So I'll slice that off, so it means I can use the stem. And I'm going to work through the flowers, just bringing them all to approximately the same length, and then discarding the stems. I'm just discreetly dropping them on the floor at the moment, but if you're going to work more tidily, you could be aiming for the bin. So the reason I'm not aiming for my bin is because I've put my bin over there out of shot, and also I just find it easier to tidy up at the end. You always get one bit of stem that's gone missing. Again, I've got a flower head there that's fallen off, so I'm going to get rid of that stem. Now these side shoots you get on here, you can actually root those. I normally put them into a jam jar of water and wait until the roots develop. Hello Julie, it's nice of you to join me. Have you ever tried rooting your carnation stems? It's quite effective. The thing is, I love arranging flowers, but honestly, I'm not a gardener at all. So although I like the idea of doing these things, I don't really carry them out in practice. And I end up with these jars on the windowsill that, unless my husband wants to put them in the garden, don't get put anywhere. So they get left to one side. So I'm going quite slowly here, but you can see the idea. I've cut down my stems, the original ones, quite tall. Can you see the difference there? Working out which way to carry them. So probably I'm actually cutting a good half off the length, I would think. So I shall speed up, otherwise we'll be here all day. And one way I can do that is to bunch all the flowers in my hand. If I get the flowers more or less level in my hand, then measure them up against my old ones, I can cut through 3 or 4 lengths at a time, and that will make it faster for me. The same again, bundle them up in my hand, getting all the heads sort of flat and level at the top, measure that up against one of my other stems, and then I can just go straight the way through, making sure I'm throwing away my cut ends and not my ends that have got the flowers on them. If you work too quickly, you get a bit confused about what's aiming for the bin and what's aiming for the vase. So again, a bundle of stems, the heads as high up in the hand as I can get there. Oh, Gaynor, you like carnations, do you? Now, some people really, really loathe them. They see carnations as being a really old-fashioned flower and they wouldn't want to have it at home. But the beauty of the carnation is it just lasts so long. You have as long as you buy them with a bit of colour showing in the bud, and you could have them in the vase. I reckon they would be in the vase for 2 weeks, if not longer. And just them, first of all, making sure that you're refilling your stem, freshening up your water in your vase every now and again, and then recut the stems every few days or so. So you'll start off with great big long stems, and as you're looking after them, they'll get shorter and shorter. So the idea today wasn't just to arrange your flowers in a vase, because that's way too easy for you all. I'm sure we'll get your skills progressing. I mean, it looks pretty enough, but I think we can do much better than that. So the idea today was actually to arrange the flowers on the outside of my vase to get a more streamlined look, something that looks a bit more designery and more eye-catching if you've got friends and family coming around. So one easy way to do this, I've got a washed out peanut butter jar here, and then I've got some elastic bands as well. These are the ones that, the postman, when he delivers, oh gosh, it's obviously an old one, it's pinged. We seem to end up with loads of elastic bands. and quite often I pick them up in the street as well. So I've gone round twice with that band there, and because that has just pinged, I should have had an emergency with me. I'm going to see if I can reach across and get a spare elastic band. Here we are, there's another one there. The reason why I'm putting 2 on is because I'm going to thread the flowers through here, and sometimes if you just have one band through the middle, everything becomes a bit top heavy and it slides out. So I work with holding up my elastic band, and I'm going to make, you know, a little fence of flowers. So I've just tucked that in on the band. If you could do it with one elastic band, but I just from experience, the more stems you put in, things start just becoming a tiny bit unbalanced. So at the moment, it just probably doesn't look any different than having the flowers actually in the water. But you can see if I hold it there, they are on the outside edge. And I'm making this little, as I say, like a little old-fashioned palisade fence going around your garden. And pushing those in like that. So it's really easy to do. And to speed up, I'm going to lie my vase down so I can see what I'm doing. And again, instead of going a stem at a time, I've got 2 stems there and slide them through. It just means I can see what I'm doing there, but I think you can still see in the picture what I'm doing. Separating it out the bands, making sure you've got a band at the top, band at the bottom, and just hold things together. And this is a really easy way of arranging flowers. And what you could do, if you haven't got any flowers to hand, perhaps you were doing some trimming in the garden, you could use, you know, old sticks, things you're cutting back in the garden. Woody stems would be a really good thing to use. At Christmas time, if you had really long cinnamon sticks, that would make a nice decoration, or even those candy canes that you get at Christmas. It's another idea. So it's just a nice way of making, it's almost like you're making a living vase, really, that the flowers are adding interest on the outside, and you could always fill up the centre of the vase and add in flowers around the top. So I'm sort of halfway around, and I've just discovered my flowers are different lengths, but never mind. I can trim those down. I think the ones at the top were too long, so I'm going to pull those down a little bit just to try and make sure I get this head of white at the front. As I say, when you go through, if you see anything that looks a bit past its best, you can just trim those off a little bit. So for purposes of speed, I shall take 2 or 3 stems at once and push those into the underneath the elastic band, turning round. So you may find that when you're working on a project like this, it's really hard to say how many flowers you're going to use, because it depends on how big your jar is. You may decide to do this with a, you know, a proper glass vase, or if you've got a, you know, a conventional jam jar, it'll be a bit smaller than my peanut butter jar. And so it is really hard to say how many flowers you need. But the beauty is you could always spread the flowers out, so they don't need to be really, really tightly packed together. I mean, it does look really good when they're really tightly packed together, but if you were running out of space, there's no reason why you couldn't separate them out a little bit, and then you could see through to the inside of the jar as well. So it's all up to you as the designer. You dictate what happens with these flowers. You don't have to conform to what you think they should be looking like. So it's all up to you. So I'm just coming back to the beginning. I think those stems are a bit short. So I've got a gap there. So I will just gently feed everything through, and I'm just making sure that the gaps are more or less even. I haven't got a real bald spot at one end, that it does look as if I've planned it that way. And you've got options here as well. I've tended to keep the little side shoots on here because I quite like the sort of textural contrast. You've got the straight stems with the knobbly nodes in between, but if you didn't like them, you could go through and pinch those off. And if you didn't like the fact that some of the flowers are a bit shorter than the others, you could really, really painstakingly make sure each individual flower stem was the same length, instead of making sure the general bunch was the same length. So I'm going to reduce the height of those. I want it a tiny bit shorter, I've decided. So I'm going to pull them all down a little bit. And then when I'm happy with it, I'm going to trim off the excess stems. So I've got this really long, there it is, that really long stem there I don't want poking up. Come down like that. And if needs be, if you find you've got a flower that sits higher than the others, you could just go in and cut the flower out if it wasn't behaving. Sometimes it's quite tricky to work out which flower is attached to which stem. So you can see now that my stems here, although I cut them to an approximate length at the beginning, they are all different lengths, and I've decided to pull them all down shorter than I intended. So my next step is to go through and cut the stems so they line through with the bottom of the vase. So neatly cut there, and then the ones that still need trimming on this outer edge, and just go around and do that. It's pinging everywhere again. If I clear out that workspace there, and you can see that the flowers will sit on the side of the container. And actually I thought, you know, you could put flowers in the middle, but you can see I had such bushy flowers that they've totally filled up the centre of my vase, so I don't need to put anything else in. But for instance, if you were doing this using roses, where you've just got the one flower head per stem, they would stand more like little soldiers around the edge of your vase or your jam jar, and you would be able to put something else in. It'd be quite nice actually to do it with roses around the edge and then have your greenery in the middle, sort of just playing on the effect really. Now the elastic band isn't massively attractive, so what I'm going to do now is I've got some twine ribbon, I don't know where this came from actually, it's posh string basically, and I'm going to take off a really generous length. I've probably got a couple of meters there. And if I fold that in half just to get the midpoint, and I'm going to wrap it around my flowers. So I've laid my vase in the midpoint of the flowers, and I take the two long ends and I'm crossing them over, and I'm pulling it quite tight. So this is what's going to be holding the flowers together. And then I'm running down the vase. So you could just do this all in the same spot. I think it might be quite nice and give my flowers more support if I take the string down in a sort of zigzag effect. So I'm going from back to front, and tying, crossing the string in the middle there, so you can still see my elastic bands, and then round to the back again, crossing them over, round to the front, and you just carry on depending on how many stripes you want, how much string you've got. And then I shall tie that off there really tight with a knot at the front and trim those bits of string away. And then I don't need my elastic bands anymore, so I can just either slide them off if you want to save your elastic bands, or snip them off, so just a ping and that releases. And then you can see there that the stem is the string there. I've ended up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bindings of string going around the edge, which again adds to the decorative quality of the vase. And this time I think I prefer actually the little side shoots taken off, but you can decide that, you know, leave them on to begin with, and then you can just adjust according to what you want to do. And then you're going to ask me, well, how are your flowers going to stay alive, Julie, if they're not in water on the outside the vase? Well, the trick here then is to get a saucer or a shallow container and set your vase down inside that, and then you just need to pour a tiny bit of water in. Obviously this is only going to hold, you know, a minimum amount of water, you know, 1/2 centimetre to 1 centimetre of water at absolute most. So it will be imperative that you make sure the water's topped up, you know, every day, or even on really hot days, that you're looking at it several times a day. But it's just going to be a fun way for arranging those everyday carnations to give a bit more of a designer flair. And if you're not a carnation fan, perhaps you might be, you know, it'd be a nice idea to try this project out and just have something that looks a bit more fashionable, a bit more on trend on your side. And if you love carnations and you just want to do something different with them, have a go and see how you get on. So I hope you've enjoyed that. So just a little project there, and so adaptable. So all sorts of flowers you could use. I've mentioned roses, cinnamon sticks, gerbera. Gerbera are a more expensive flower, and also they're soft stems. So when you came to tie the string, you may find that you're crunching into the stems. So it might not be a massively a good idea to use a soft stem flower. So you're looking for something that's woodier and more robust. And in terms of woodiness, you know, if you are cutting back shrubs and greenery from your garden, that you could, instead of putting it straight on the compost heap, you can create your own little vase. I've done this before actually with lavender flowers, picking them just before they're in maximum bloom, so just sort of 3/4 open, and held it there. Same technique, but because the lavender was much skinnier, it didn't block up the centre of the vase. And then I put a nightlight in, and then you could see the nightlight shining out through the gaps in the stems. And in fact, that dried. And as the stems dry, they contract a little bit. So you really need to make sure your fixings, your wrapping is really tight, or be prepared to untie it and reattach it, because you'll then find as the stems dry out, if it is a dried flower arrangement you want to create, that they all slide and move around a little bit. So I'm going to leave it there for now. And I'd love to see any photos if you decide to have a go at this project. And I will post some pictures. Perhaps I'll make a blog post about this over the weekend if you want more detailed instructions. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you another time. Cheerio.